Commissioner McElhaney, it's great to see you again. Thank you for your service to our country. I'd like to say at the outset a word about the chairman of this committee. I believe that he comes to this issue with a background that few of us can share. We've worked together for months, make it years, on this issue. Senator Graham is the only Republican senator before you today who voted for comprehensive immigration reform. Some were not here. Those who were here voted against it. It goes back to 2013. It was an effort with Senator John McCain, Chuck Schumer, and others. 8 of us worked for 6 months or longer to put together a comprehensive bill to address many of the issues we're facing today. Passed it in the United States Senate with a bipartisan vote, and the Republicans in the House refused to even bring it up for consideration. And so the problems continue and worsen. And the problems we face today that we'll hear testimony on have been outlined already by my colleagues. There are several aspects of this which I'd like to highlight. When Commissioner McElhaney came into my office in October of 2017, I asked him a question as this crisis, as they term it, was starting to unfold. If I gave you a blank check with Customs and Border Protection, a blank check, what would you spend it on to make our borders safer and more secure? His answer to me, technology and personnel. I asked him to be specific about technology. He said, Z portals. These are X-ray and scanning devices. We can scan cars and trucks coming across the border. 90% of the narcotics coming to the United States come through ports of entry, and we only scan 18% of the vehicles coming across the border. We should scan them all. Sounded right to me, sounded practical, and then I looked at President Trump's budget. He asked for $44 million in 2019 for that purpose. Luckily, this came up, as the Commissioner knows, during the course of our Situation Room meetings during the shutdown, and the President maybe overruled some people at the table and changed his position, said, I support it. So the conference committee bill that we passed in the Senate has over $500 million for these devices. Does that make us more secure and safer? I'll bet it does. And so did Commissioner McElhaney when he made that recommendation. But I'd like to address the basic issue that we ought to face here. And as Senator Cornyn said, facts are facts. Here are the facts. The country bordering the United States is Mexico. In the city of Chicago, there are more Mexican Hispanic Americans than any other nationality. And yet we've reached a point in immigration where we have an outflow from the United States into Mexico. The Mexicans are not gathering at the border to come into the United States. It's the people who live in Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. Why are they coming? They're coming because of the situation they face at home. And what they face at home is so worrisome and so dangerous, they are willing to literally risk their lives to come to the United States. If we want to get down to the root causes of why we're sitting here today, we cannot ignore the reality. And the reality is that drug cartels and gangs are terrorizing the people in these 3 countries. The reality is that climate change and a drought has made subsistence agriculture a failure in these countries. And the reality is that these people in these countries are willing to risk everything, sell everything they own to give to a coyote or smuggler to try to make it to the United States and live and survive. And they know what they face in the journey, not just the loss of their money, but possibly the loss of their lives and the lives of their children. They are that desperate to do it. And so as we talk about all the things we need to do at the border, can we ignore what's going on in these 3 countries? What's happening in these 3 countries has to be focused on if we're going to solve this problem. And yet the administration has made a dramatic cut in assistance to these countries when they need it the most. And who are the drug gangs and cartels? Well, they are seasoned criminals who now have overtaken the law enforcement agencies of these countries. How did they get in this position? I'll tell you, I'll give you 2 reasons. One is drug money from the United States flowing back to these countries. The second is guns from the United States flowing into these countries. 70% of the crime guns they find in these countries come from the United States. So you wonder why these drug gangs and cartels are menacing these people and threatening them and scaring them to the point where they're ready to risk their lives? That's part of the calculation. I want to address 2 or 3 things that were raised by, I see you didn't start the clock, but I'm going to assume that I just have a few minutes left because I know my colleagues are waiting patiently. Cost of detention. It is expensive to detain families, children, individuals. I don't dispute what the chairman has said in terms of the cost. But the detention is for a purpose. The detention is for the purpose of making sure, or at least hoping, that they return for a hearing as to their eligibility for status under asylum. Are there alternatives to detention that cost a fraction of what the chairman quoted? At least three. There are three alternatives to detention which cost $3 or $4 a day. Let me tell you what they are. Ankle bracelets. Over 95% of the people return for their hearing if there's ankle bracelets. Having some sort of advocacy and counseling. Over 90% of the people will return for a hearing if they're counseled as to what their rights will be. Access to an attorney is another guarantee of return for the hearing, a fraction of the cost of detention. And yet these things are not even being considered as alternatives. What we're talking about is building beds and cells and cages. Let me also say about the Flores decision. The Flores decision gives us a choice. The Flores decision says to us, after a child has been held for 20 days, they can no longer be treated as detainees or prisoners. They have to be put in some family setting. When you look at this, you can understand why many of us believe that after we've gone through zero tolerance, where 2,800 that we know of, 2,800 infants, toddlers, and children were forcibly removed from their parents and then lost in computer systems of this federal government, is it any wonder that we want to take care of the children in the future that are in our custody are not kids in cages? Flores guarantees that. And those who want to do away with Flores are prepared to accept, I'm afraid, terrible alternatives. Let me just close by saying this. The situation in Central America in these three countries that gives rise to this hearing is a serious situation that needs to be addressed directly, or we'll continue to pay these prices. You cannot treat emphysema with cough drops. And the notion that we can ignore what's happening in these three countries and what's causing these people to risk their lives to come to the United States is naive and wrong. We need to treat both situations. The root causes of this migration to the United States and the treatment of those who come to the border. We can do this, and I hope we can do it on a bipartisan basis.